resurrections before the cross.
Memory text. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me, even if he dies, will live, and everyone who lives and believes in me will never die forever. Do you believe this? John 11:25, 26.
Several people were resurrected before Jesus died on the cross, in both Old Testament and New. Not a single one of these ever told a story of being taken to heaven, hell, or some intermediate place. Only one, Moses, was taken up to paradise after being buried.
This further solidifies the facts that clearly show the unconsciousness of the dead.
The resurrection of Moses. Although Moses was not allowed into Canaan, the promised land, he would soon be in the final land of promise and taken to heaven. Deuteronomy 34:5-7. So Moses the servant of the Lord died there in the land of Moab, according to the word of the Lord. And he buried him in a valley in the land of Moab, opposite Beth Peor, but no one knows his grave to this day. Moses was 120 years old when he died. His eyes were not dim, nor his natural vigor diminished. Moses died and was buried. Nothing here talks about his soul residing somewhere in a conscious state, separate from the body. In Jude 9, we read what happened to the body of Moses later. Jude 9. Yet Michael the archangel, in contending with the devil, when he disputed about the body of Moses, dared not bring against him a reviling accusation, but said, The Lord rebuke you.
Notice this is not saying anything about the soul of Moses. This narrative is only about his body. We have stated at the beginning that Moses was different. He was indeed resurrected and taken to heaven. His body and soul together made him a living being once again. We know this because of the transfiguration with Jesus. Luke 9:28-30. About 8 days later Jesus took Peter, John, and James up on a mountain to pray. And as he was praying, the appearance of his face was transformed, and his clothes became dazzling white. Suddenly, two men, Moses and Elijah, appeared and began talking with Jesus. Some have argued this made Moses two separate beings. One a body, and one a soul that lived in heaven. This makes no sense as Moses was standing there talking to Jesus. The disciples did not see a formless spirit. They saw two men standing before them and talking with Jesus. Peter himself confirms this. Luke 9:33. As Moses and Elijah were starting to leave, Peter, not even knowing what he was saying, blurted out, Master, it's wonderful for us to be here. Let's make 3 shelters as memorials, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. A formless spirit of a soul would not ever seem to be in need of some shelter.
2 Old Testament cases. 2 women had their sons resurrected from death in 1st and 2nd Kings. Under King Ahab and his wicked wife Jezebel, Israel was under great apostasy. The land was suffering through a drought, and God told Elijah to go to the town of Zarephath. This was outside of Israel, and he met a poor Phoenician widow who had enough food for one last meal. This would serve her and her son, and she presumed they would die afterward. Elijah had asked for some of the food also, and the woman shared gladly. God performed a miracle through Elijah so that her oil and flour never ran out amid the drought. The son later became sick and died. The widow thought that her sins had caused this through meeting Elijah. Elijah took the son and prayed to God, and her son came back to life.
The next resurrection took place with Elisha in Shunem, south of Mount Gilboa. After helping a widow miraculously pay her debts with oil, Elisha met a married woman with no children. She and her husband were hospitable to him, providing him food and shelter whenever he came by. To repay this kindness, Elisha told her she would have a son. Later, this son became sick and died. The Shunammite woman traveled in faith to see Elisha and told him about the death. Elisha prayed, and the child was healed. These two women were generous and faithful, although of different backgrounds. They experienced joy at resurrections and had faith in miracles. We might not experience miracles like these, but all of us have experienced the love of God. We need faith. These women had faith with no promise or knowledge that their sons would be resurrected. Our faith comes with the knowledge of the resurrection of the dead when Jesus returns.
The son of the widow of Nain.
Luke 7:11-15. Now it happened, the day after, that he went into a city called Nain, and many of his disciples went with him, and a large crowd. And when he came near the gate of the city, behold, a dead man was being carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow. And a large crowd from the city was with her. When the Lord saw her, he had compassion on her and said to her, "Do not weep." Then he came and touched the open coffin, and those who carried him stood still. And he said, "Young man, I say to you, arise." So he who was dead sat up and began to speak. And he presented him to his mother.
As Jesus watched the funeral procession, he was moved with compassion. During the ministry of Jesus, he looked for those to help. These people included the sick, the lame, widowed, hungry, and grieving parents. Jesus' reputation was built on these tender-hearted acts. This was especially true after raising the dead man in Nain.
Luke 7:16-17. Then fear came upon all, and they glorified God, saying, "A great prophet has risen up among us, and God has visited his people." And this report about him went throughout all Judea and all the surrounding region. It is interesting here to note the difference in this resurrection and the two previous ones we mentioned. The widow in Nain had not sought Jesus. There is no record of her asking for help. Jesus is the one that came to her. We are called to be Christ-like. We are to care and minister to those hurting around us.
Jairus' daughter. Jesus healed and helped people regardless of where they were from, or what they were. Jairus was a ruler of the synagogue, and his 12-year-old daughter was sick at home.
Mark 5:22-24, 35-42. And behold, one of the rulers of the synagogue came, Jairus by name. And when he saw him, he fell at his feet and begged him earnestly, saying, "My little daughter lies at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her, that she may be healed, and she will live." So Jesus went with him, and a great multitude followed him and thronged him. While he was still speaking, some came from the ruler of the synagogue's house who said, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" As soon as Jesus heard the word that was spoken, he said to the ruler of the synagogue, "Do not be afraid, only believe." And he permitted no one to follow him except Peter, James, and John the brother of James. Then he came to the house of the ruler of the synagogue, and saw a tumult and those who wept and wailed loudly. When he came in, he said to them, "Why make this commotion and weep? The child is not dead, but sleeping." And they ridiculed him. But when he had put them all outside, he took the father and the mother of the child, and those who were with him, and entered where the child was lying. Then he took the child by the hand, and said to her, "Talitha, cumi," which is translated, "Little girl, I say to you, arise." Immediately the girl arose and walked, for she was 12 years of age. And they were overcome with great amazement.
The word sleep is Jesus' way of gently saying someone is dead. Jesus told others to not fear, but have faith. People knew death is final, and seeing Jesus raise the girl must have been amazingly shocking to them.
When we are fearful, Let us listen to the words of Jesus. Do not fear, have faith, your deliverance will come.
Lazarus. Next to Jesus, the story of the resurrection of Lazarus is perhaps the most loved story of resurrection in the Bible. Jesus learns Lazarus is sick, but seems to take his time getting there. Lazarus is the brother to Mary and Martha, and Jesus must have loved him very much. Everyone involved here wonders why Jesus seems to wait. John 11:4. When Jesus heard that, he said, "This sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God, that the Son of God may be glorified through it." God has complete control over man and his sicknesses. God can use our infirmities for his work. We then understand that Jesus will glorify God by raising Lazarus. Lazarus was dead for days, erasing all possibilities that he would wake naturally. Doctors and science cannot possibly raise someone back to life after that much time passed. This miraculous sign was given so people understood that only God has the power to raise the dead.
John 11:11. After he had said this, he went on to tell them, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I am going there to wake him up." Jesus again uses sleep to describe death. Martha believed in a final resurrection of the dead. Nowhere can anyone get an idea from this story that people are taken to heaven on death. If you are still wondering about that statement, ask yourself these questions. Where was Lazarus during these 4 days? Why is there no record of him having any memory of being out of the grave in heaven? Jesus says a short prayer, then, now when he had said these things, he cried with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come forth." When Lazarus arose, Mary, Martha, Lazarus, and the many around Jesus saw firsthand the glory of God. The glory of a hopeless situation turned into a miracle. We have an interesting choice of the words of Jesus in the middle of this story. John 11:25-26. Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, though he may die, he shall live. And whoever lives and believes in me shall never die." Do you believe this? Jesus talks of believers as never dying. He many times referred to death as sleep. Those who follow Jesus will sleep for a time, then be woken to everlasting life. In a very true sense, we will never die.